The snow falling outside the window wasn't just frozen water. It was the ashes of my past, settling softly over a life that had been ruthlessly extinguished. I am 80 years old, and my true prison is not the small, sterile apartment above my son's garage. My true prison is the memory of a single, agonizing afternoon 5 years ago. This story doesn't begin with a young mother's joy. It begins with an old woman's shock, the moment I realized my golden-haired boy, Daniel, was no longer my son, but a stranger shaped by his wife's cold design. It was the day after Robert, my beloved husband, was laid to rest. The house our beautiful, rambling Victorian in Connecticut's till held the faint, metallic scent of funeral flowers. I was a ghost in my own home, moving on legs that felt like crumbling stone, when Daniel approached me in the sunroom. "Mom," he started, his voice lowered to that false, soothing register I now recognized as preparation for a lie. He sat across from me, not reaching for my hand, just resting his own hands on his knees in a gesture of paternal concern, a gesture he had never needed to use with me before. "We need to talk about the house," he said. I looked at him, my vision still blurred with the tears I hadn't yet managed to shed for Robert. "It's fine, darling. Your father paid the taxes before he left. I'm fine here." "No, you're not fine, Mom," Daniel insisted, the concern in his eyes not reaching the cold edge of his mouth. "It's too much. The upkeep, the expense, the loneliness. You'll be rattling around in here like a marble in a tin can. Cassandra and I." He paused, a slight hesitation that quickly morphed into resolve. "We've been talking. We think the smart thing to do is sell. Take the equity, put the bulk of it away for your long-term care. And we'll build you a beautiful, private space right over our new garage extension. You'll be safe. You'll be here, with family." The suggestion wasn't the shock. The shock was the sudden, undeniable clarity. In that moment, I didn't just hear the words. I heard the hidden subtext, the cold, calculated blueprint of his future. I saw a flicker of his wife, Cassandra, in the tight set of his jaw, in the rehearsed confidence of his pitch. It wasn't a proposal for my comfort. It was an eviction notice veiled in filial concern. A lifetime of deep, protective love for my son battled with the immediate, chilling survival instinct of a woman suddenly made vulnerable. I wanted to scream. "You are trying to take my home while my husband's grave is still fresh." But I could only manage a whisper, the sound tight in my throat. "Daniel, this house is my life. It's the only place I can still feel Robert." "Mom, sentimental value doesn't pay for roof repairs," he said, and the practical cruelty of the statement was the first, defining blow. "Look, we've already had the realtor come by. We have a buyer. They are offering top dollar, all cash. This is a gift, Mom, a chance for you to be free of worry. You need to sign the papers this afternoon." He slid a heavy manila envelope across the polished mahogany table. It was over. The decision had been made. The buyer found, the documents prepared. All while I was weeping in my grief-stricken bubble. My autonomy, my dignity, my entire financial future had been decided by my son and his wife in a cold, premeditated council. The true root of my sorrow was not the love I had given Daniel, but the shock of his capacity for calculated heartlessness. I signed the papers not because I agreed, but because I was too broken to fight. In that instant, I made the mistake that would define my remaining years. I exchanged my financial independence for the illusion of my son's love. 5 years later, the present winter. The irony was a bitter pill. The new apartment over the garage was soundproofed. Not to give me peace, but to ensure the sounds of my solitary life never reached Daniel and Cassandra's ears. Now, as the current winter howled outside, I sat shivering. I wasn't cold from the weather. I was cold from the isolation. I was utterly dependent on Daniel and Cassandra, not just for shelter, but for groceries, transportation, and even the thermostat, which Cassandra controlled remotely. A sudden, sharp series of Noxa proprietary rat-a-tat-tat interrupted the silence. It was Cassandra. She never tapped. She attacked the door. I rose, my joints protesting with a grinding ache. I opened the door to find Cassandra framed in the doorway, impeccably dressed and radiating an icy dissatisfaction. "Mother-in-law, we need to talk," Cassandra stated, not asked. She didn't step in. She stood, blocking the light, her face a mask of pinched annoyance. "The new school taxes just came in. They are outrageous. Daniel and I have had to make some adjustments to the household budget. Effective immediately. Your food and medication allowance is being cut by 25%. I gaped. "But my heart medication, Cassandra. I can't cut that." Cassandra gave a dismissive, brittle laugh. "Then you'll have to stretch your portions, won't you? Look, Eleanor, you have a roof over your head. Provided by my husband and I, that is a generous gift. You need to start contributing to the sacrifices being made here. This is non-negotiable." And then, she delivered the truly crushing blow. The one that proved the earlier betrayal was just the start. "Furthermore, we are having a large work function next Saturday. 50 guests. We need your space. We'll be setting up a temporary bar and coat checkup here. I need you out by 8 a.m. Daniel will drive you to the community center for the day. You can be back at 10 that night. And don't forget," Cassandra added, her voice dropping to a low, venomous threat, "to clean the apartment top to bottom before you leave. I won't have my guests seeing dust." I looked past my daughter-in-law's flawless exterior and saw the truth. They weren't just exploiting me. They were erasing me. They needed my money, but not my presence. They needed my apartment, but not my person. I was a piece of furniture, and a dusty one at that, to be moved and ordered around. The final, piercing thought that locked the story in place was this. This is what Daniel allowed. This is what the boy I sacrificed everything for has become. The weight of that realization, heavier than any snowfall, was my true inheritance. The illusion of care, the sting of Cassandra's decree, the 25% cut to my allowance, was not the worst part. The worst part was the absolute silence that followed. Daniel, my son, my only child, said nothing. He was sitting at their mammoth kitchen island, scrolling through financial reports on his tablet, when Cassandra walked back into the main house after delivering her eviction order for next Saturday. He didn't even glance up. He didn't ask if I was okay. He didn't object. He just nodded absently when she confirmed, "It's done." She knows about the budget cut. That nod, that simple, bovine acceptance of cruelty, hurt more than the initial betrayal 5 years ago. Because 5 years ago, I had signed the papers in a haze of grief. Now, I was signing away my remaining dignity with every breath I took in their home. The next morning, Cassandra came up again, not with the abrupt, jarring knock of the previous day, but with a false, saccharine cheer that was even more unnerving. She was carrying a massive, industrial-grade plastic binder, the kind you see corporate accountants use. "Good morning, mother-in-law," she chirped, standing over my small, worn breakfast table. She placed the binder down. It landed with a dull, heavy thud, announcing its permanent presence. "What is this, Cassandra?" I asked, my voice thin and dry. "This is our family financial management system," she announced, as if presenting a Nobel Prize. "And you are going to love it. We are streamlining things, Eleanor. Efficiency. Since we are now covering all your expenses, food, utilities, health insurance, property tax contributions, it's only logical that we manage the physical paperwork." I knew exactly what this meant. It wasn't about efficiency. It was about control. It was the official decommissioning of my life. She opened the binder, her polished nails clicking against the plastic sleeves. "Now, all your documents need to go in here. Your social security statements, your pension information, the title for your old car, every single insurance card, and..." She paused, her eyes narrowing slightly. "All those old bank statements Robert kept in the attic. We need a clear picture of all available assets. just in case we need to access them quickly for your care. But those are private. I protested, my stomach twisting. My late husband was very particular about those files. They stay with me. Cassandra didn't raise her voice. That was her signature move. The calm, quiet authority that promised total obliteration if challenged. Eleanor, you signed a power of attorney 5 years ago. Daniel has the legal right to access all this. But we don't want to make things legal, do we? We are family. So, I am giving you a choice. You hand over these documents, or Daniel, and I will simply have your garage door lock changed, and we will wait until you decide to comply. We have all the time in the world. And you, she smiled, a thin, cold crescent on her face, need that 25% food allowance, don't you? It was blackmail, pure and simple, veiled as a gentle suggestion. She wasn't asking. She was dictating. She knew the weight of my dependence, and she wielded it like a cudgel. I remember staring at the binder. Inside that ugly plastic cover wasn't just my paperwork. It was the last semblance of my independent existence. I saw my mother's old recipe for ginger snaps tucked away in a ledger, the faded picture of Robert and me on our honeymoon in Venice, memories that would now be categorized and controlled by the woman who hated me. My heart sank into a well of cold, sickening finality. I was alone. Completely, terrifyingly alone. There in the old cedar chest. I whispered, defeated. Cassandra's smile widened, a true, triumphant smile this time. Wonderful. We'll send Daniel up later to retrieve them. See? Communication is key. Mother-in-law. Now, about those new pharmacy prescriptions. As she meticulously wrote a note in the binder, the true nature of my new life settled in. I was a patient. A ward. A burden whose existence was now entirely managed, categorized, and budgeted for by my captor. The house, my former home, was right outside my window, glowing warmly in the early winter sun. And yet it felt a million miles away. The illusion of care was the cruelest deception of all. It was a comfortable cage, lined with the silk of my own sacrificed wealth, and I knew, with chilling certainty, that this was only the start of Cassandra's reign. After Cassandra left with her bulky binder, my financial life trapped inside, I felt lighter, yet entirely hollow. The weight of worry had been lifted, but replaced by the crushing weight of utter powerlessness. A day passed in a blur of cleaning. I scrubbed my small apartment for the work party she demanded, feeling like a servant in my own life. Daniel had come and gone, taking the cedar chest with my old documents. He didn't meet my eyes. He was efficient, silent, and entirely unlike the boy who once wept when his bicycle tire went flat. It was on the second day that the first prickle of suspicion began. I was performing my daily ritual, making tea in the tiny kitchen nook. My hands automatically reached for the ceramic jar where I kept my spare keys. I had 2 key sets for the main house before Robert died. One for me, and one that stayed locked in my little wooden jewelry box. A gift from Robert on our 10th anniversary. The jar was empty. My breath hitched. I didn't usually need those keys anymore. The locks on the main house had been changed when they built this apartment, and my access was revoked. But the thought that I didn't even possess the old spares was unsettling. I dismissed it. Maybe I misplaced them when packing up the chest. But then, my gaze fell on the wooden jewelry box on my dresser. It wasn't the box itself that looked wrong, but the atmosphere around it. It looked disturbed. This box wasn't for jewelry. It was small, discreet, and heavy, made of dark cherry wood. It had a delicate silver clasp, but no lock. Inside, I didn't keep rings or necklaces. I kept the things only Robert and I knew about. A handwritten note from Robert confirming the location of his father's safe deposit box, which held his true will, the one predating Daniel's marriage. My small, emergency stash of cash, about $500 I had been saving since before the move. My real independence fund. My father's old gold pocket watch, a family heirloom I treasured. I walked slowly to the dresser, my heart beginning to hammer against my ribs. I lifted the lid. The contents were there. I breathed out a long, shaky sigh of relief. The pocket watch gleamed reassuringly. Robert's note, tucked beneath the velvet lining, felt thick beneath my fingers. The cash bundle. I frowned. I pulled out the bills. I counted them twice, my fingers trembling slightly. There were exactly $400. $100 was missing. $100. For Daniel and Cassandra was nothing a single meal out. But for me, it was 2 weeks of medication, or a month's worth of personal necessities not covered by their budget. More importantly, it confirmed what I hadn't wanted to believe. This wasn't just my son being busy or negligent. This was theft. They had been in my room. They had opened my box. They hadn't taken the cash entirely, because that would have been too obvious. They had taken a small, untraceable amount, counting on my old age, my distress, and my habit of not counting the money. They wanted to test the waters. A chill ran through me, colder than the winter outside. If they were bold enough to steal a small amount of cash from a hidden spot, what else had they done? I reached deep into the box, my fingers searching for Robert's note. I pulled it out and smoothed the fragile paper. It was still there. The name of the bank and the box number, written in Robert's familiar, steady hand. I read the note again, my focus sharp and sudden, like a lightning strike. The note was intact. The documents were safe. Wait, I turned the note over. Robert had a meticulous habit of adding a small, personal mark to any document he wanted to ensure hadn't been copied or tampered with. A tiny, almost invisible R drawn in the bottom right corner of the reverse side. It was our secret signature. I held the paper up to the light, my old eyes straining. The R was there, but beside it, the paper looked too clean, almost as if a faint pencil mark had been aggressively erased. It was just a suspicion, a ghost of an imperfection. But in that moment, the isolation and the sorrow transformed into something hard and bright and desperate. The will to fight. They wanted to treat me like a woman whose memory was fading, a woman who couldn't count her own money. Well, I decided right then and there, I was going to prove them wrong. This was no longer about getting my house back. This was about proving that Eleanor Vance was still alive. My missing $100 and that faint suspicious erasure mark became my fuel. The game, I realized with a shudder, had just begun. Those missing $100 were a theft. But that erasure mark on the note about the safe deposit box, that was a declaration of war. It wasn't just a suspicion anymore. It was proof that Daniel and Cassandra hadn't just evicted me from my home, they were dismantling my future. I needed to be strong. And first, I needed to get to that safe deposit box. I held Robert's note in my trembling hand. First National Bank, Milford branch. Milford was an hour away. How on earth would I get there? I looked around my small, sterile room. This wasn't a sanctuary. It was a soundproofed cage. There was no landline. Cassandra had changed the Wi-Fi password a year ago, claiming, "You don't need the stress of the internet, Mom. We'll handle everything." My freedom was entirely dependent on their charity. But I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. Robert always used to say, "Eleanor, if you're ever fighting alone, look at what you have, not what you lack." What did I have? I still had the cleverness Robert had taught me years ago. He insisted everyone should have a plan B. I sat up and looked at my old winter boots, shoved deep behind the curtain. I pulled one onto the bed. After Robert passed, I had hidden anything I considered a tool for freedom inside things Daniel wouldn't look at. I reached into the lining of the left boot. There, wrapped in a thin cloth, was my old clunky flip phone. It was strictly for calls, no internet. I had hidden it, hoping to make an emergency call one day when Daniel or Cassandra weren't watching. I pressed the power button. Nothing. The screen remained black. The battery was dead. This was my first problem. I had to charge it. And I had to do it secretly. If Cassandra found that old phone and charger plugged into the wall, she would know instantly that I was plotting something. I scanned every inch of the room. They had installed sleek, modern outlets on 2 walls. But behind the heavy, oak bookcase, a piece of furniture they deemed too heavy to move during the renovation, there was an old, single outlet. Robert had placed the bookcase there years ago. To hide it, it had escaped their notice. I retrieved the charger from the other boot and plugged it into that hidden outlet. I wedged the phone between the back of the bookcase and the wall. My next opportunity was this coming Saturday, the day Cassandra had ordered me out of the house for her party. Saturday, from 8 a.m. to 10 p.m. Daniel would drop me at the community center and leave. That would be my day of battle. I knew then that I needed to call Mrs. Petrov, Helen, Robert's old secretary. She was the only person Robert trusted implicitly outside the family. My heart began to hammer. A tiny glimmer of hope had turned into a spark. Next Saturday was my window. I had to charge this phone, keep it hidden, and somehow contact Helen without being caught. I realized then that I wasn't just fighting for money. I was fighting to prove that Eleanor Vance was still here, still alive, and not ready to be erased. Saturday morning was bitterly cold, matching the look in Daniel's eyes. He loaded me into the car at 8 a.m. sharp. We drove in silence. When we reached the community center, he didn't even turn off the engine. "I'll pick you up at 10 p.m. And Mom, please don't call. We'll be very busy with the guests," he said, staring straight ahead. I nodded, opened the door, and clutched my old shawl tighter. As his taillights vanished into the morning mist, I took a deep breath. I was alone. Finally, the community center was busy, full of people, enjoying bingo and tea. I walked straight to the back, past the main hall, to a quiet corner near the vending machines where people rarely sat. My heart was racing. I pulled the small flip phone from the inside pocket of my coat. I pressed the power button. The screen flickered to life. Full battery. 2 bars of signal. I quickly dialed Mrs. Petrov's number, which I had memorized from Robert's old diary. Ring. Ring. Hello. A familiar, stern, but kind voice. My eyes welled up. Helen? My voice came out as a whisper. Helen. It's Eleanor. Eleanor Vance. There was a long silence on the other end. Then, a gasp. Eleanor? Oh my God. Eleanor? Where are you? I tried to call you so many times. Daniel told me your dementia had advanced, and you refused to speak to anyone. My blood ran cold. What? No, Helen, my mind is fine. They have cut me off. Helen. From the world. From my friends. From everything. I quickly explained everything: the house sale, the garage apartment, the missing cash, and the erasure mark on the note. I knew it, Helen said, her voice now sharp with purpose. I always suspected that boy. Eleanor. Listen. Robert gave me something 1 week before he died. He said, Helen, if Eleanor is ever in trouble, or if you feel something is wrong, open this envelope. But only if you are sure. An envelope? What is in it? Helen. A key, Helen said quietly. And a letter. Robert called it his fail-safe. He feared Daniel might try to take control. Eleanor. That safe deposit box you found the note about. Robert never put Daniel's name on the access list. The only people who can open it are you and me. I need that key, Helen. I said, my voice now firm. I know. But I can't drive anymore. And you can't leave. We need to meet. Eleanor. Quickly. Before they realize you've made contact. Suddenly, the automatic doors at the front of the community center slid open with a whoosh. I looked up. Standing there, scanning the room with cold, predatory eyes, was a tall man in a black coat. It wasn't Daniel. It was Cassandra's brother, Mark. He was looking for me. I shoved the phone deep into my shawl. "Helen," I whispered urgently. "I have to go. Someone is here." I hung up and concealed the phone. Mark's eyes swept across the hall and then locked onto me. He offered a tight, chilling smile and started walking toward me. The game had just turned dangerous. The moment Mark's eyes locked onto mine, the cold terror I had been fighting for 5 years solidified into a searing, focused rage. He wasn't here by coincidence. Cassandra had sent her hound. They hadn't trusted Daniel's simple drop-off. They needed confirmation that their possession me was secured and harmlessly occupied. Mark approached with the lazy, confident stride of a man who rarely faces resistance. He had his sister's chilling handsomeness, but lacked her practiced charm. "Well, hello there, Eleanor," he said, standing over me. The easy familiarity made me sick. "Daniel asked me to pop in. Just making sure you're settled in and enjoying your day out." The party preparations are hectic. I quickly tucked my hands under my shawl, ensuring no glimpse of the tiny phone could be caught. I forced my expression into a look of slight confusion, the kind they expected from the ailing elderly woman. "Oh, Mark," I fluttered, leaning back against the cold wall. "How nice of you." "Yes, it's quite lively in here, isn't it? I was just trying to decide if I have enough shillings for the next round of bingo." "Did you say Daniel was busy?" "Extremely busy," he confirmed. But his eyes weren't on my face. They were scanning the table and the floor around me. He was checking for anything that suggested activity beyond passive observation. "Did you take your medication this morning, Eleanor?" The question was a weapon. It wasn't about my health. It was about asserting his control and reminding me of my dependence. "Of course, dear," I replied, forcing a weak smile. "I'm very careful about that. Have you seen Robert's old friend, Mr. Peterson? He usually comes on Saturdays." I deliberately mentioned a man I knew hadn't attended the center in years, hoping to send Mark on a pointless search. Mark gave me a patronizing smile. "Don't worry about Mr. Peterson. Just enjoy the afternoon. I'll let Daniel know you're safe." He stood there for another excruciating minute, pretending to adjust his cuff, but truly just observing the complete lack of any threat. He clearly concluded that I was nothing more than an old woman preoccupied with the next bingo number. Satisfied, he gave a curt nod and walked away toward the front exit. The moment the automatic doors whooshed shut behind him, the room spun. The relief was immense, but it was poisoned by the cold realization. I was under active surveillance. I had to warn Helen. My hidden plan to call her back later that afternoon was now too risky. Mark might return, or they might monitor the community center's outgoing calls. I couldn't risk a conversation. I needed a single, coded message. My hands flew back to the phone hidden beneath my clothes. I needed credit to send a text, but I had none. Wait, Helen's number was saved. I quickly accessed the emergency text function, which sometimes worked even with a zero balance. I typed a message so simple, only Helen could understand the urgency and the code. Milford Bridge. Sunrise. Solo. Milford was the town of the bank. The bridge was where Robert and I used to meet secretly when we were dating. Sunrise was the time when no one in Daniel's house would be awake or looking for me. Solo meant I had to come alone, without making prior arrangements visible to Daniel. I held my breath and pressed send. The phone struggled. The screen flashed. Message failed to send. My heart plummeted. No. This couldn't be the end. I tried again. Send. A moment later, the screen blinked. Message sent. I sagged against the wall, utterly exhausted. The first whisper of freedom had been sent, but the meeting itself would be impossible. Mark's appearance confirmed my next truth. I couldn't rely on Daniel to drop me anywhere ever again. My chance to meet Helen, to access the bank, had to happen outside of their knowledge. My freedom on Saturday was merely an organized day trip. My real escape had to be a genuine disappearing act. I had 1 week. Next Sunday, at sunrise, I had to be at that bridge. But how could a captive 80-year-old woman sneak out of a soundproof apartment perched above her jailer's garage and travel an hour to Milford without a car? The answer, I knew, lay in the one thing they never paid attention to: the details of their own routine. I managed to convince him I was a harmless old lady preoccupied with bingo, and I sent Helen the crucial coded text: Milford Bridge, sunrise, solo. Now, the hard part: getting out. I had spent Saturday night and Sunday morning meticulously planning the escape. My prison had one single point of failure: routine. Daniel was an early riser, but only for work. He left the main house at 6:30 a.m. sharp, Monday through Friday. On Sunday, however, he slept until 8 a.m. Cassandra, the fitness fanatic, had her yoga session in the basement every Sunday morning, starting at 6:45 a.m., and she was always meticulous about being on time. My window of escape was the 15 minutes between 6:30 a.m. and 6:45 a.m. on a Sunday. During this time, Daniel was still asleep, and Cassandra was already downstairs, far away from the garage apartment. The first hurdle was the door. The lock was modern, heavy-duty, and automatic. They thought I needed a key, but when they renovated, they skimped on the small detail of the deadbolt strike plate. It was cheap, slightly loose, and barely recessed. I had an old, stiff credit card that had expired years ago, hidden in my sewing kit. Sunday morning arrived, dark and silent. I dressed in my warmest clothes, stuffing Robert's banknote deep into my coat pocket. At exactly 6:35 a.m., I stood at the door. I took a trembling breath, slid the credit card into the minuscule gap between the door and the frame, and pushed gently. Just above the strike plate, click, the lock sprung open. It wasn't genius, it was exploiting cheap construction. I slipped out, into the cold, silent garage. The main house was dark. I moved like a ghost, avoiding the squeaky floorboards near the kitchen door. I slipped through the garage and out the side door, into the crisp, pre-dawn air. I didn't head for the street. I headed for the main house's backyard fence. I knew the landscaping lights only covered the front drive. The back of the yard, near the dense pine trees, was a blind spot. I climbed the low wooden fence, a small feat for an 80-year-old, fueled entirely by adrenaline and righteous fury. Once over, I was on the quiet, wooded back lane. I saw it immediately. A dark, older model sedan, idling silently about 50 yards down the road. It wasn't a taxi. It was discreet. I ran. It was more of a desperate, shuffling trot toward the sedan. The passenger door opened just as I approached. "Eleanor, get in." Behind the wheel sat a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a resolute jaw. It wasn't Helen, but a woman Helen had clearly trusted enough to involve in this dangerous rescue. "Helen's driver," the woman said simply, without introductions. "We need to go. Fast." The car pulled away, merging onto the highway toward Milford. I was shaking, tears streaming down my face, but for the first time in 5 years, they were not tears of sorrow. They were tears of pure, terrifying freedom. As the sun began to breach the horizon, painting the sky in fiery oranges and pinks, the very sunrise I had coded, we slowed near a scenic overlook bridge. Helen was standing there. She looked older, frailer than I remembered, but she carried herself with Robert's same defiant dignity. She waved the iconic, dark cherry wood key box I had last seen 30 years ago. I stumbled out of the car and into her arms. "Oh, Helen," I sobbed. "Don't cry, my dear," Helen whispered, pulling back. She didn't waste a second. She handed me a heavy, sealed manila envelope. "Everything is in here. The key, and the letter. Now, let's go. The bank opens in 20 minutes. We don't have much time." The final piece of the puzzle, the key to unlocking Robert's secret and exposing my son's deceit, was finally in my hand. The morning silence of Milford Bank was piercingly loud. Helen and I, two elderly women driven by loyalty and survival, stood at the marble counter, determined to expose a deceit that had cost me 5 years of my life. Carol, Helen's driver, waited outside, our vigilant protector. We went straight to the safe deposit section. The bank manager, a mild-mannered man who resembled an aging professor, recognized Helen. "Mrs. Petroff, good to see you. And Mrs. Vance. I trust you are well. I recall Mr. Vance called many times over the years to check on you." "I am perfectly well," I managed, the tremor in my voice replaced by steady resolve. "We are here to access Robert Vance's safe deposit box, number 319. The manager checked Helen's ID, then mine. When he glanced at the access form, a flicker of surprise crossed his face. "I apologize, Mrs. Vance," he said. "Access is restricted to just 2 people, you and Mrs. Petroff. Mr. Daniel Vance's name was never on the authorization list." A wave of triumph washed over me. Daniel's greatest pretense of having total legal and financial control was crumbling, confirmed by the bank's own sterile records. The manager led us to the vault. Helen inserted her key, and I, using the key retrieved from Robert's cherrywood box, inserted mine. Click! The locker sprung open. Inside was a single, heavy, yellowed manila envelope. Helen placed the envelope in my hands. We retreated to a quiet, private meeting room. My heart was hammering so loudly I barely heard myself breathe. With trembling fingers, I broke the fragile seal. Inside were 2 crucial items. The codicil, the hidden will. This was Robert's final, private legal document. It stated clearly that his entire estate and all financial control were to be given solely to Eleanor Vance. The document established a trust, with only one trustee, Helen Petroff. Crucially, it stipulated that Daniel Vance was only entitled to a small annual allowance, and only so long as he treated me with respect and care. If he interfered with my financial status or subjected me to ill treatment, the allowance would be instantly revoked. A hard drive, this small digital device, felt incredibly potent. Tucked alongside it was a note from Robert. "Eleanor, this is the proof. This evidence shows that Daniel attempted to defraud you. It contains records of all the hidden accounts, his documented illegal transactions using the power of attorney he already possessed, and the original untampered copy of the will he attempted to render useless." I was stunned. Robert hadn't just protected me. He had carefully mapped out every step of Daniel's expected downfall. "Oh, Robert," I whispered, tears blurring the text. "You were always 2 steps ahead." Helen gripped my hand. "You've won, Eleanor. This codicil, this evidence, this changes everything. We must contact Mr. Sterling immediately. Robert's lawyer. His office is right here in Milford." The isolation was over. I was no longer a victim. I was a claimant, armed with a powerful weapon forged by a love that transcended the grave. The feeling of the manila envelope, now empty but for the papers, was lighter than the weight of winter, but far heavier than the weight of gold. The truth was out. The isolation was over. I was no longer a victim. I was a claimant, armed with a powerful weapon forged by a love that transcended the grave. The feeling of the manila envelope, now empty but for the papers, was lighter than the weight of winter, but far heavier than the weight of gold. The truth was out. The rush of adrenaline that had carried me across the fence and into Helen's waiting car finally gave way to cold, rational fear. We were now armed with truth, but we were also fugitives. Helen had directed her friend, a woman named Carol, to the office of Mr. Henry Sterling, Robert's personal attorney. The office was quiet, dignified, and smelled reassuringly of aged paper and leather. Mr. Sterling, a man with a shock of silver hair and eyes that missed nothing, listened patiently as Helen recounted Daniel's deceit and I laid the contents of the manila envelope on his desk. The codicil, the true will, and the small, heavy hard drive. He spent 10 minutes comparing the signatures on the codicil to authenticated documents from his files. "This is Robert's handwriting." "No question," Mr. Sterling stated, his voice tight with professional certainty. He adjusted his glasses. "The first will Daniel used to gain power of attorney was valid for health decisions." "Yes, but Robert executed this codicil 5 years ago, specifically limiting Daniel's financial inheritance to an allowance conditional on your care. He foresaw this, Eleanor." I could only close my eyes, a fresh wave of grief washing over me. Robert had known his own son was capable of this. "What about the accounts, Mr. Sterling?" Helen pressed, her hand resting on mine. "The hard drive, Mrs. Petrov, is the key to proving elder fraud and misuse of the power of attorney," he said. "If this data shows Daniel and Cassandra systematically emptying accounts based on the premise of the false will, we have not just a civil case, but a criminal one." Mr. Sterling acted with breathtaking speed. He immediately called his team. "We are filing an emergency injunction with the probate court this afternoon," he dictated into his headset. "We are asking for an immediate freezing of all accounts held jointly by Daniel and Cassandra Vance, based on the discovery of a disputed codicil and evidence of financial malfeasance." The word malfeasance felt like a stone hitting glass, the sound of their gilded cage shattering. He looked at me, his expression grave. "Eleanor, you are currently an unreported missing person. Daniel and Cassandra will soon realize you accessed the vault. They are going to panic and likely come after you. Not physically, but legally. Perhaps claiming you were not mentally competent to leave. We know Mark, Cassandra's brother, is actively looking for me," I said, the fear returning. "Then you cannot go back to that apartment. And you cannot stay in a hotel," Mr. Sterling concluded. "Mrs. Petrov, can you host Eleanor for a few days? Until we secure a temporary restraining order and establish a safe residence for her." "She's welcome at my home," Helen affirmed instantly. As Mr. Sterling's assistant ran out to file the paperwork, the hard drive was sent to a forensic accountant. The gears of justice were finally grinding, but the sound was deafening. We were halfway to Helen's quiet suburban home when Mr. Sterling's private line rang. He answered, listened grimly, and hung up. He turned to me, his silver hair catching the late afternoon sun. "That was the police," he said. "Daniel Vance reported the safe deposit box accessed at 10 a.m. He is claiming you stole documents while in a confused state, and that the codicil is a forgery." The bank confirmed that his name was never on the access list. "But worse," Mr. Sterling paused, his voice dropping. "Cassandra just made a large withdrawal attempt from what she thought was the last hidden account. The bank froze it as per our injunction. They know they've been compromised." "What will they do?" I whispered, my heart pounding. "They will come after you with everything they have. They are rich, desperate, and now officially panicked. But they have already made their biggest mistake. They came for you legally. Now we will finish them legally." I looked out the window. For the first time, I wasn't just surviving, I was fighting. And with Robert's wisdom and Helen's loyalty, I knew I would win. The 2 weeks that followed were a whirlwind of legal documents, sworn affidavits, and media avoidance. Daniel and Cassandra tried everything. They claimed I was delusional. They produced dated evaluations from a doctor Cassandra had paid off. But Mr. Sterling was relentless. He had the hard drive, Robert's meticulous records, and the codicil, the ultimate truth. The preliminary court hearing felt less like a courtroom battle and more like an organized execution. Daniel and Cassandra sat across the aisle, their usual composure shattered. Cassandra looked gaunt, her expensive clothing suddenly seeming like a cheap costume. Daniel avoided my eyes, his face a roadmap of panic and disbelief. When the judge delivered the ruling, the air in the room seemed to crackle with finality. Based on the conclusive forensic evidence of financial malfeasance, the unauthorized use of the power of attorney, and the existence of a legally executed codicil, this court hereby rules that Mrs. Eleanor Vance shall immediately be granted control over all assets held in her late husband's name. The judge's voice was firm. Furthermore, this court is referring the matter of elder fraud to the district attorney's office for criminal investigation. Daniel let out a choked sound, A strangled, animalistic gasp. Cassandra jumped up, ready to protest, but Mr. Sterling's associate immediately served them both with papers detailing the frozen accounts. They were financially ruined and criminally exposed. In that moment, I looked at Daniel not with hatred, but with a profound, aching pity. The boy I raised was gone. He had traded his soul for his wife's greed, and now he had nothing left. The allowance Robert had conditionally left him was dissolved, because the condition honorable care had been violated in the most profound way. I had won, but the victory tasted like dust. Helen moved me out of her house a week later, not into my old Victorian home, but into a beautiful, sun-drenched cottage not far from Milford. I was finally independent, financially secure, and surrounded by quiet peace. The most difficult decision was what to do with the house, the beautiful, rambling Victorian that held every memory of Robert and my youth. Mr. Sterling advised me it would sell for a small fortune. I walked through its empty rooms one last time. The sunroom where Daniel had delivered his eviction notice now felt cold and impersonal. The house was not just filled with love, it was stained with betrayal. I decided not to live there. I decided not to sell it for mere profit. Instead, I used the proceeds from the house sale to establish the Robert Vance Legacy Trust, dedicated to providing legal aid for elderly people facing financial abuse by their own families. I was making sure that the house, which was taken from me by deceit, would now protect others from the same fate. My final act was to visit Robert's grave, the spot I hadn't been able to visit properly since the day I signed away my life. I laid a single white rose on the granite. I didn't weep. You knew, I whispered to the cold stone. You knew what they were capable of, and you gave me the strength and the tools to fight back, even after you were gone. The true inheritance Robert left me was not the money. It was the fail-safe, his unwavering faith that I would be strong enough to survive the dark. I looked out at the late autumn sky, the heavy, dark weight that had settled on me that fateful winter 5 years ago. The crushing burden of dependence and grief was finally, irrevocably gone. I was 80 years old, alone, and completely free. The winter had lifted.